Okay, let's dive right into this. Imagine a site so ancient, so utterly baffling, that it literally forces us to toss everything we thought we knew about early human civilization right out the window. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're exploring an archaeological marvel that is completely rewriting the history books. We're talking about a massive complex built before writing, before the wheel, and way before the very first cities. According to our traditional timeline of human progress, this place simply shouldn't exist. Yet, there it stands, challenging our deepest assumptions about exactly who we are and where we came from.
So, just how mind-bendingly old is this site? We're looking at a timeline that stretches back roughly 12,000 years. Construction at this site began around 9,600 BCE. To put that into perspective for a second, Göbekli Tepe predates Stonehenge by over 6,000 years. It predates the earliest Egyptian pyramids by more than 7,000 years. Think about that. Cleopatra actually lived closer in time to the invention of the iPhone than she did to the building of Göbekli Tepe. It's just a staggering expanse of time, isolating this incredible monument in an era we used to think was populated exclusively by simple, primitive bands of humans.
So what exactly is it? Well, Göbekli Tepe translates from Turkish as pot-bellied hill, or sometimes hill of the navel. And for 10 millennia, it looked exactly like that, just a dusty, belly-shaped hill out in southeastern Turkey. And here's the wild part. American archaeologists actually surveyed this exact hill back in the 1960s. They were looking for Stone Age material, found a few Paleolithic flints, and then they completely dismissed it. They basically walked right over the biggest archaeological find of the century. It wasn't until the 1990s, when the brilliant German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt started his excavations, that the earth was finally peeled back to reveal the monumental truth hiding right underneath. Rewriting human history. Let's take a look at how the physical evidence uncovered here completely upends our timeline of human evolution. The number 20 is absolutely crucial here, because as Schmidt's team dug into the earth, they didn't just find primitive stone tools. No, they found massive circular stone enclosures. Rising straight out of the ground were these towering limestone T-shaped pillars. And we're talking huge. Some of these pillars stand nearly 20 feet tall and weigh up to 20 tons each. That is the weight of about 3 adult African elephants, all carved from solid bedrock and moved into incredibly precise circular formations. The sheer scale and ambition here would be impressive for an advanced ancient civilization, but the dating of the site, that's what brings us to a massive historical contradiction. It brings us to this massive paradox. See, everything we knew about early humans suggested that back in 9,600 BCE, we were entirely nomadic hunter-gatherers, just small, highly mobile groups focused purely on day-to-day survival. No agriculture, no permanent settlements, and for sure no complex stonemasonry. Yet, Göbekli Tepe is undeniably the work of megalithic builders. This kind of project required a highly organized society capable of feeding and managing a massive labor force, not to mention executing complex engineering and architectural design. So how on earth did simple hunter-foragers pull off a project of this magnitude? It is a puzzle that literally keeps archaeologists awake at night. And it's not just the engineering. The artistry of these monoliths is absolutely captivating. I mean, imagine dragging a 20-ton stone, only to realize you still have to carve a giant, intricate scorpion into it using primitive tools. Because these T-shaped pillars aren't blank blocks of stone, they're heavily decorated. They feature highly intricate carvings of animals, scorpions, birds, foxes, and wild boars. Plus, there were these mysterious humanoid figures and elaborate abstract symbols. Some researchers look at these carvings and see deep mythological or spiritual meaning, maybe even the earliest physical representation of human religion. Others think they might have been practical, like territorial warnings of ancient danger. But whatever their true purpose was, the craftsmanship is just undeniable. So how do they actually cut and move these massive stones without modern tools or even the wheel? Well, archaeologists looking at sister sites in the region, like Karahan Tepe, have actually found some answers. They uncovered this highly practical, really ingenious quarrying technique. First, the builders would roughly chisel the side of the limestone bedrock. Then, they'd carve the opposite side about 40 centimeters wide and 1 meter deep. Once the shape was formed, they would carefully detach the T-shaped pillar from its base. And finally, instead of relying on some complex lifting mechanics, they just used the natural slopes to slide the 20-ton monoliths right out of the quarry and into position. Brilliant, right? The dawn of agriculture. This single location doesn't just challenge our timeline, it sits right at the crossroads of the most important transition in human history. Because here is where the timeline shifts entirely. When construction at Göbekli Tepe first started, there was absolutely no sign of agriculture in the world. The people hauling these stones were definitively hunter-foragers. But Göbekli Tepe was in use for roughly 1,200 years. And as the site was elaborated on and expanded over those centuries, something huge happened. Agriculture was introduced. By the time the site was actually finalized, farming was taking root right there in the surrounding region. It bridges the gap perfectly, and it really suggests that maybe the sheer need to feed massive work crews at this sacred site is what actually drove the invention of farming itself. The Tepeler civilization. Because as breathtaking as Göbekli Tepe is, we're now discovering it wasn't just an isolated anomaly. Modern excavations have revealed that Göbekli Tepe is actually part of a much, much wider phenomenon that Turkish archaeologists are now calling the Tepeler, or the Stone Hills civilization. We're talking about a massive regional network spanning up to 125 miles. Across this vast area, researchers are finding multiple sites that share the exact same identifying characteristics, those semi-subterranean circular structures and the unmistakable T-shaped megalithic pillars. And this tells us something vital. Göbekli Tepe wasn't just a sudden, unexplainable flash of genius. It was the grand summation, the absolute pinnacle of an entire civilization's architectural and cultural evolution. To really understand how this civilization functioned, we can compare the sites. On one hand, you have Göbekli Tepe, which features the absolute largest and most elaborate stone enclosures. But then you have places like Kırhan Tepe, an older sister site with similar but noticeably smaller architecture. Archaeologist Jen Notrow has this fascinating theory to explain the dynamic here. She suggests that Göbekli Tepe likely served the entire region as a central cathedral, a massive hub of immense importance. Meanwhile, the surrounding smaller sacred sites like Kırhan Tepe acted more like local parishes for the widespread population. The ultimate mystery: deliberate burial. Because just as we begin to wrap our heads around how it was built, we're forced to confront the most baffling aspect of all: how it ended. Around 8,400 BC, after over a millennium of continuous use, elaboration, and reverence, these builders did something totally unimaginable. They didn't just abandon the site to the elements, they intentionally closed it down. They hauled in massive amounts of earth, dirt, and rubble, and they painstakingly buried the entire complex, perfectly sealing off those towering pillars and intricate carvings. They topped the whole thing off, creating that pot-bellied hill, and then they just walked away, hiding their absolute masterpiece from the world for the next 10,000 years. But why? Why go through the trouble of burying it? To explore that, let's look at one of the site's most famous artifacts, Pillar 43, located in Enclosure D. It's often called the Vulture Stone. This pillar is incredibly dense with imagery. Researchers like Paul Burley noticed that a prominent scorpion carving on the stone closely matches our modern representation of the constellation Scorpio. Building on this, researchers like Martin Sweetman theorize that Pillar 43 is actually a complex astronomical diagram. According to their statistical analysis, the carvings might be memorializing a specific celestial alignment, pointing all the way back to the year 10,500 BC, an era characterized by some dramatic climatic shifts on Earth. Now, this astronomical alignment fuels a pretty provocative theory brought forward by author Graham Hancock. When analyzing this deliberate burial alongside the potential astronomical data on Pillar 43, Hancock suggests, and I quote, "So we have a time capsule at Göbekli Tepe. It could be used to send a message to the future. And think about it, because it was deliberately buried, no later cultures could tread over it and contaminate it. The entire site was perfectly preserved in a state of suspended animation." While researchers heavily debate the interpretations of these symbols, the idea of an ancient civilization intentionally preserving a message in stone, it's an undeniably captivating concept. Which brings us to the ultimate question, and the one I really want you to take away and ponder today. Why would humanity's first great builders, after spending centuries dragging 20-ton stones and carving incredible artistry, deliberately bury their ultimate masterpiece in the dirt? Were they protecting it from a rapidly changing world? Were they hiding it from an invading threat? Or were they just maybe saving it specifically for us to find 10 millennia later? The ground has only just begun to yield the secrets of the Tepeler civilization, and the answer, waiting right beneath the dust, might just change the human story forever.